Okay, Anthony. Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Warrant Officer Class 1 Colin Leggett. Today marks the 80th anniversary of the sinking of the Japanese merchant vessel Montevideo Maru. When Rabaul fell to the Japanese in January 1942, more than 1,400 members of Australia's Lark Force were captured. Some 160 were killed shortly after the surrender. Later that year, on the 22nd of June, approximately 850 prisoners of war and 200 civilian internees were ordered by their Japanese captors to board the vessel Montevideo Maru. The ship then sailed for the Japanese base on Hainan Island, keeping to the east of the Philippines to avoid Allied submarines. 8 days into the voyage, the Montevideo Maru was spotted by the American submarine USS Sturgeon. Unaware of the ship's cargo, Sturgeon manoeuvred into position and fired its torpedoes. According to both Sturgeon's log and accounts of Japanese survivors, the Montevideo Maru sank by the stern in roughly 11 minutes. Although the crew was ordered to abandon ship, they apparently made no attempt to release the prisoners. The loss of the Montevideo Maru remains Australia's worst maritime disaster. The ship was carrying more than 1,050 Australian prisoners, none of whom survived the sinking. Today, we remember all those who were lost in the Montevideo Maru and whose names are recorded here on the Roll of Honour. We will shortly recount the story of just one, Corporal George William Spensley of the New Guinea Volunteer Rifles. We warmly welcome the family of Corporal George William Spensley, whose story will be told shortly. This evening, we are honoured to acknowledge Ms Andrea Williams, representing the Papua New Guinea Association of Australia, Mr Ross Johnson, representing the New Guinea Volunteer Rifles and Papua New Guinea Volunteer Rifles, Ex-Members Association, Mr John Reeves, representing the Rabaul Historical Society, and Mr John King, representing the Returned and Services League of Australia, ACT branch. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of the ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by family and visitors to the memorial. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozieres France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Corporal George William Spensley. George Spensley was born on the 28th of June 1904 in Auckland, New Zealand, the son of George and Nora Cavendish Spensley. He grew up in Auckland, where he attended Dilworth School. Spensley lived in Auckland until at least the late 1920s. His father died in Sydney in 1916, and his Irish-born mother died in New Zealand in 1922. Spensley became the New Guinea manager for Collier, Watson and Company, a company based in Auckland that traded in skins, leather, tallow, hide and copra. On the 14th of October 1935, Spensley married Teresa Ross Cox at St George's Church in Rabaul. The couple went on to have 2 children. With the coming of the Second World War, Spensley became a member of the New Guinea Volunteer Rifles, a militia unit consisting of white Australian and European expatriates in New Guinea. The 2nd 22nd Battalion began arriving in Rabaul in March and April 1941, directed to garrison Rabaul. The battalion combined with the New Guinea Volunteer Rifles, a coastal defence battery, an anti-aircraft battery, and elements of the 2nd 10th Field Ambulance and 17th Anti-Tank Battery. Together, they formed Lark Force, later also supported by No. 24 Squadron of the Royal Australian Air Force. Lark Force's role was to protect the airfields at Lukanai and Vunakanu and the seaplane base at Rabaul, as well as providing early warning of Japanese movements through the islands to Australia's north. Like the other bird forces deployed to Australia's north, Lark Force was small, ill-equipped, and likely to be overwhelmed by enemy attack. The first air attacks on Rabaul began on the 4th of January 1942. Within days, the Japanese had succeeded in destroying the bulk of the defending aircraft, while further attacks targeted shipping in the harbour and shore installations. By the morning of the 22nd of January, No. 24 Squadron was virtually destroyed and its 3 remaining aircraft were withdrawn. With no use for the airstrips, they were destroyed and Lark Force withdrew, waiting on the western shores of Blanche Bay for the inevitable Japanese landings. Corporal George Spensley had been called to full-time duty with the New Guinea Volunteer Rifles just 2 days before the Japanese invasion. Anticipating the invasion, he provisioned several caves in the bush behind the plantations before retreating there. The invasion began on the 23rd of January. By 9 a.m, communication failures and overwhelming Japanese strength had destroyed the cohesion of the Australian defence. After Lark Force Commander ordered a withdrawal that morning on the basis of every man for himself, Lark Force disintegrated. Groups of men, ranging from company strength down to pairs and individuals, sought escape along New Britain's north and south coast. Some found small boats and escaped, while others were picked up by larger vessels operating from New Guinea. Around 400 members of Lark Force managed to return to Australia, 300 of whom were members of 2nd 22nd Battalion. A grisly fate awaited those who were captured. On the 4th of February, shortly after their surrender, a group of 160 were massacred at the Toll Plantation. Spensley was lucky enough to avoid this fate, but he was captured near the Warrungoi River and became a prisoner of war, initially held at Rabaul. He was later among the group of approximately 850 military prisoners and 200 civilian internees who were ordered to board the Montevideo Maru on the morning of the 22nd of June. The Montevideo Maru sailed unescortedly for Hainan Island, keeping to the east of the Philippines, in an effort to avoid the Allied submarines. 8 days into the voyage, the Montevideo Maru was spotted by the American submarine USS Sturgeon, which manoeuvred into position to fire its stern torpedoes. Survivors from the Montevideo Maru's Japanese crew reported 2 torpedoes striking the vessel, followed by an explosion in the oil tank in the aft hull. The vessel sank in as little as 11 minutes. Of those aboard, barely 20 Japanese crew survived. Over 1,000 others died. According to a surviving Japanese crewman, Australians in the water sang Auld Lang Syne to their trapped mates as the ship sank beneath the waves. The sinking of the Montevideo Maru is considered the worst maritime disaster in Australia's history. Unaware of the ship's loss, the families of those on the Montevideo Maru continued to send letters in the belief that their loved ones were being held as prisoners of war. It was not until after the war that they discovered the prisoner's fate. Corporal George Spensley was not officially declared presumed dead until November 1945. With no grave but the sea, today he is commemorated on the Rabaul Memorial. Posthumously enrolled in the 2nd Australian Imperial Force, George Spensley was 38 years old. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour to my right among almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Corporal George William Spensley, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We'll remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many men lying out there at Pozières, or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the Director and staff, we thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support during the Memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening.